Hi, everyone. I'm Katie with Katie's Homeschool Cottage, and I am going to talk about how do you do a nature study in your homeschool. And then at the same time, study a huge number of science topics, in your homeschool as well. So it's more than just going out and taking a nature hike, which can be fun. But it's a little bit more involved if you want to actually study some science topics and get some concepts and skills in there as well. What I did was I wrote a book, and it's an ebook at my website, katieshomeschoolcottage.com, and it is obviously more detailed. It's 160 some pages. It's more detailed about what you can study, how you can study it, and resources to help you study. So, just to give you an overview of what this has in it, plus how can you conduct a nature study, I'm going to just give you an idea of what's in here and give you an idea of how you can conduct your own nature studies. First of all, there are resources and links and books to read in here on how to do a nature study, ways to do it, ideas to get you started. And then this book has 4 seasons in it, starting with winter all the way through autumn. And it starts each season with poetry because a lot of poetry is about nature because poets would admire nature and then write about it and what it looked like, sounded, tasted, felt like, what it made them feel like. So it's a good time to try to slide in some poetry in your studies as well. So, anyway, just to give you an idea of some topics that you can study during autumn specifically, and this entire book has all of these topics listed. Um, Leaves, trees, autumnal equinox just in September. And it always starts out with a poem or several poems, and then it gives you reading suggestions with the books and the authors, and it gives you an idea of what books you can actually start reading. And that's kind of what I did with my guys when we did nature studies. Is we would start with a book and we would start reading about that topic. So for instance, if you're in fall, this is a book called Full of Fall, and it talks about all the different things that happen in fall, and specifically it talks about the trees and the leaves changing. So it kind of is an introduction to um, a fall study about trees and leaves and the colors that are changing. And then there's a list that I've included about during and also post walk suggestions. For instance, take a walk in the woods or your backyard or to a park. Look at the leaves changing in your area. And then if they change later, then try next month, not just September, maybe October. And then it gives you a list of things to do when you look at the leaves, some activities to do while you're out there, things to look at, what kind of questions. It has question suggestions to ask your child so that it kind of gets them thinking and interacting with nature as well, and some discussions going so that you know what to maybe talk about. There's also then a whole section on scientific connections. So, and this is kind of what I suggest if you want to take a step further beyond just going out in nature and talking about it and that kind of thing. You can go into science topics. And I suggest maybe exploring, okay, so you're going to talk about leaves and trees. So, what can you talk about beyond that when maybe you get home? Well, photosynthesis, leaf shapes, attachments, and groupings, as far as how the leaves are attached to the tree, changes that occur in autumn, and then uses for leaves. And so, in this book particularly, I give you titles of books that would help you explore those topics. Then I give you links, and then I'm kind of doing all the work for you that I would suggest that you do with a nature study and also studying science, where you'd go on the internet and look up different topics on the internet. I give you the topics with several links. So, for instance, if you want to study photosynthesis, there are links in here having to do with information about photosynthesis as well as experiments to do with photosynthesis. as well as researching and doing experiments and information about different kinds of leaves, their shapes, how they're attached to the branches, the names of leaves. Then it goes on to why do leaves change color, and then some experiments about that. Coniferous needles, evergreen leaves, as opposed to deciduous trees. Um, Also, planting a garden with plants, shrubs, trees with different kinds of leaves throughout the seasons. Some crafts with leaves. And then also maybe some research if you want to look into some research about how leaves can be food or medicine or make life better for us. And then also maybe extend your study of leaves onto trees, and then just talk about trees in general. So that's just kicking off with just leaves. Then there's a whole thing. You can then do a whole entire study where it starts all over again about trees and their life cycle. And then it gives you another list of books, and then suggestions for during the walk, after the walk, questions, then again, scientific connections. What can you explore about the trees? Well, you can explore from seed to fruit, the life of a log. Once it comes out, a branch or a tree is cut down, and then the log is just laying there, it almost becomes its own ecosystem, and how all the different insects and animals might use a log. And there's a neat book um, about that. There's several of them: Life in a Log, Dead Log, Alive. So it goes into how a log almost is recycled in nature. And then also you have the whole seeds and the seed dispersal, different things that fall off the trees, tree identification, tree rings. How can you identify how long a tree has been living? Conservation for forests, rainforest preservation, and deforestation and how it affects the environment, products that are made from trees, paper recycling. And then you can explore the scientific process when you're going into experiments. And then you have a whole list of books about all of this. And then again, I give you links for research, activities, and experiments. And then it gives you a whole list of different suggestions for experiments or research. And then it starts all over again with another topic, and then it gives you the same kind of information per topic. So we have autumnal equinox and fall weather, so you can do some research on weather. And then it gives you, again, like I said, the whole list of things that I supply. And then from there, you can go into the moon, the seasons, solar energy, color and heat absorption and insolation, thermal capacity on water versus land, as we cool off during this season. And then for October, it goes into birds in migration. And then it gives, again, all the different resources and suggestions. And then you can look into um, animals, rocks and soil, parasitic plants for November, with the animals preparing for winter, going into animal habitats and adaptations for animals, underground habitats and animals. Then you can even look at the rocks and soil, because again, November is kind of when things are starting to die. So if you're looking for something to do in nature, looking at the rocks and the soil and doing a study about that, this would be a good time for that as well. And so you can look into rocks, minerals, fossils, soil, earthquakes, ring of fire, volcanoes, weathering and erosion, rock formations, rock cycle, caves, stalactites and stalagmites, having to do with all of that. So again, I supply all the different books, the walk suggestions, the questions, the experiments, the activities, the research. And then you can move into parasitic plants, because once a forest in the fall is more exposed, it's easier to find these parasitic plants. So then you have, again, all the suggestions to do with that. And you can look at parasites, predatory plants, hollies, Indian paintbrush, and mistletoe. If you live in an area in November, December, the holly starts becoming more abundant. So you can start talking about these types of plants. So then at the end of the book, I have a whole section on nature journaling. And I have some resources about that, lists of books, websites, nature study ideas. And then I also include nature study pages for journals that you could use it. I have lined ones that you could print off. And again, these are in an ebooks format. I'm just showing you a hard copy that I have. It also has pages where you can draw as well as write, which is what I used to have my guys do. I used to have them draw a picture of what they're talking about and then write, because it kind of gets their creative juices flowing. So we have all kinds of different pages for that. And then at the very end, because as I said, poetry and nature go hand in hand. Oh, here's one if you want to get into more detail, where it gives you a place to put the date, the location, the weather, the name of the item that you're going to be drawing a picture about and writing about. Where did you see it? And then the scientific name that gets a little bit more specific. But as I said, poetry and nature go hand in hand. So if you wanted to do a poetry study at the same time, I supply the poetry with each month. And then at the back, I also give some resources to use with a poetry study. And it includes all different kinds of poems with links. It gives some suggestions what to do with the poetry. It gives links to those as well. As well as poetic devices and literary devices. So that's that's kind of an overview of this book and what it supplies you with. And then what I would do with the nature study, a lot of times, for instance, during the summer, we might go fishing and look at fish or see the fish in a lake or a pond or a stream. And then we would identify them, and that would go in our nature journal. And then maybe we would take a trip to the beach and find how many seashells we could find and identify those as well. And then when we do this out in our nature study, in our walks and hikes, we used to take books with us. So here's an example of one. This one has lines in it. This is obviously blue, but you can find all kinds. This one is a little bit flexible, but it does have enough strength to it where you could use it outside and have enough strength to write and draw. And that's what I would have my kids do if they wanted to just use a book. Otherwise, I would print off these nature journal pages I showed you and put them on a clipboard. And they would slide the clipboard into their backpack. And inside their backpack, we would have these little guides with us. So we would look things up on our walks. You could also do something a little bit more flimsy. These are very inexpensive. You can find them, on Amazon. You can find them in a bookstore, school supply. But they're smaller and they're blank. But they're a little bit on the flimsy side. So you want to be able to have something to write on. But those are two examples, as well as pages that you could put into a 3-ring notebook, which we did a lot of, because we would also make a sheet to, once we started the scientific process, we would actually fill out those on a piece of paper while we did experiments, and we would put our notes from our nature study walks, as well as any kind of research we did, and our experiments all together inside our notebooks. So to give you also an idea of what we would use, for instance, we talked about trees. We said something about, leaves changing and about the life cycle of a tree and seeds falling from the tree. So we would start off maybe with a book like this, A Tree is a Plant. Now, obviously for younger kids, but you could find something for your olders, as well. So it talks all about, how a leaf grows, and you might talk about apples are the fruit and inside are the seeds. So this would be apple season. You could go picking apples and then cut them open and look at the seeds and talk about that. You could find acorns falling off of trees, talk about how those are the seeds. And again, here's another little book that we would use to identify trees. And in here, you'll find, oh, look at that. One of our leaves that we found is pressed inside. I forgot we even had that in there. And so then you have fruit that comes off. You could talk about that. You talk about, like, for instance, here's an oak tree, has acorns, and talks about how the leaves are attached to the branches. You talk about here's the variegated leaves and the veins running through. So you could do a whole, either basic or detailed discussion, depending upon your child's interest or how old they are. Something else I told you that we did was experiments. So you could go to the library and not just use links that I included in this, but also go to the library and maybe find a book about exploring nature. And this particular one combines maybe some arts and craft objects as well as scientific activities. This one's basic. You've got sink or float. These are more artsy, crafty, or activity type projects. Then this one actually gives you some research about types of rocks, and it actually talks about the three major groups of rocks and how they're formed and what the differences are between them. So this is a basic kind of activity, something that my kids always loved to do, and we used to always we even made at one point plaster reproductions of animal prints that we would find maybe near a riverbed or a creek bed, and they loved that. We would bring the ingredients to make the plaster Paris and mix it right there and make the cast. Or we traced the tracks with a piece of paper and did a rubbing. You could also do leaf rubbings, track rubbings. They also, I know this kind of sounds gross, but scat identification. So this book actually has that, as well as animal tracks, common animal tracks. And something that you might want to consider too is if you're looking for something that has to do with these and you want to go into a deeper study and you want some kind of a booklet to follow for a specific study about a topic. Both my guys were in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. So if you go to a scout store, there's like a merit badge booklet that has all kinds of information and different activities to do, very, very detailed research. And then you can also find great identification cards at like a store. We had one on scat. We also had another one on identifying prints. And they were just like this very cheap, inexpensive, almost a cardboard, index card to look at while we went on these hikes. So, and guys, little boys and older guys are all fascinated with that kind of stuff. So this would be a basic thing where it combines arts and crafts projects and some science experiments. And then if you want to go into something more detailed and you want to go into a more detailed study and experiments on how to do the whole scientific process, Janice Van Cleve has a great series of science books. This one's on energy. This one includes heat, sound, magnetism, anything that has some kind of energy associated. And she writes it out in the scientific method format with the purpose, materials, procedure. I always add a hypothesis at the beginning to other than just a purpose, to have my kids kind of guess, what it's all about. And then after the procedure, she has results. I used to also add data, if there's any data and observations. I used to ask them to draw or write the observations. Did they see a color change? Anything that has to do with the experiment as well as the results at the very end. And then she has a why section so that you can then understand what happened in the experiment. She also includes pictures, which are real helpful in setting the experiment up. But we did a lot of these. I would find different ones at the library. Janice Van Cleef, she was great. So those are just some examples of the types of different kinds of books and that you could use in addition to websites about nature study, and it gets into more detail. Now, there's Smithsonian has great books out as well. This one's 10-minute science experiment. I always, Steve Spangler is great. I always try to find something with easy to use materials that are, easy to find materials. And I include those kinds of experiments in my book as well. Easy to find experiments and materials and instruments to use. No need to spend a bunch of money on materials at this age when they're younger. When you get into the high school level, you're going to be spending plenty of money on the laboratory type kits. So something else in the fall too, or even in the spring, would be birds, and you could find different books about birds. This one's a peek at the beaks. This is great when you talk about birds and the adaptations about their beaks and what kind of food they can eat. You could set up a bird feeder, see how many birds you can identify. We always had a bird identification book handy. you could make your own bird feeders and then see how many birds, come to your bird feeder and talk about the types of beaks and what kind of feed that they would be, eating. Some have the longer beaks, some have shorter beaks, and it depends upon what they eat. So that's great for like introducing animal adaptations. Something else which is really fun in the springtime, life cycle of frogs, and you could also go into again, chickens with eggs, and you could go into the butterflies and the caterpillars and hatching. So they're, different. We grew tadpoles, we hatched butterflies, caterpillars for butterflies. We did all kinds of things like that. And again, I always find a book at the library and start it. Something about getting ready for winter, squirrels. This one has a nut in its mouth. Again, if you have a bird feeder, chances are you're going to attract squirrels, and you're going to see them also looking for stuff to store away. So in November and December, that would be a good time to talk about hibernation and how they store things. Something else through the year, and also in the summertime when it's easier to go outside and not too cold, is stars. And we always had some kind of a constellation guide. And again, light, day and night, how light works. So these are all connected. So you could be going into seasons, autumnal equinox, the equator, what makes the seasons. Then you could go into stars. You could, after the planets, you could go into constellations, what makes light. And so this, you can do a whole bunch of like rabbit trails and springboard off of, oh, wow, look at the stars, look at the sun, look at the moon. You hear about an eclipse coming. I mean, it jumps from one topic to the next. And the reason why I did include talking about this nature study was because what I did was I tried to do all the work for you. I tried to supply the topics. I tried to string the topics together for you and group them according to how they made sense and how they were related. I tried to tie them together seasonally so you could go out and take a nature walk, observe these things in nature, and then come back and learn about them. And then I tried to give the books for you, as well as websites about discussion questions, activities, experiments, as well as diving deeper into the topics, depending upon the age and the interest of your children. So I would love for you to visit my website at katieshomeschoolcottage.com. I have the nature study guide with the link in the description underneath this video. You can also find it in my shop at katieshomeschoolcottage.com. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them underneath the video in the comment section, and give me a like and a follow for more of these videos, because I have others there on language arts as well as literary study. I'm going to be trying to do some on grammar. I have one there on how to do notebooking. So I hope you've lasted this long, and I hope you found it very helpful on how to do a nature study in your home. Happy homeschooling, and thanks for watching.